Who's the best of the big spenders, Red Sox GM Theo Epstein or Yankees GM Brian Cashman? Hey everybody, it's Paulie. Welcome back to This Week in Red, where we're talking all things Red Sox and Major League Baseball. Before every rivalry series between the Yankees and Red Sox, we often do a positional comparison on the field. But today we're going to take a look at the front office and compare Red Sox GM Theo Epstein to Yankees GM Brian Cashman to find out which one is the better general manager. Now, if you look at these two guys, they both deal with significantly large payrolls. In fact, probably the two largest in baseball. So they both have a pretty good handle on free agent spending. And, finding guys at the bottom of the roster is another thing that they're kind of charged with. Because when you have a lot of big salaried players at the top of your payroll, you kind of need to really mine the depths of Major League Baseball to find some economical guys to put at the end of your bench and at the end of your pitching staff. And, both guys have done a pretty good job with that. Especially Cashman this year, coming up with Freddie Garcia and Bartolo Colon to fill out his questionable rotation going into the season. And even if he gets nothing else out of these two guys for the rest of the season, you got to say that he's done a pretty good job of mining talent at the lower ends of the baseball spectrum. And Theo's done a good job with that this year as well for the Red Sox, finding guys like Alfredo Aceves and Matt Albers. Those guys have been really big contributors to the Red Sox solid bullpen this year. So I think in that respect, both are on equal terms in terms of managing payroll and finding guys at the end of the baseball spectrum. But where I think Epstein really has an advantage over Brian Cashman is the fact that he has built his team with a lot of homegrown talent. The Yankees seem to have more free agent signings as their core right now, whether it's Curtis Granderson or Mark Teixeira. I know Robinson Cano is a homegrown guy. But when you talk about the real core and future of the Yankees, you're talking about A-Rod, you're talking about Teixeira, and you're talking about Granderson. These are guys that were brought in either by trade or free agency. Whereas you look at the Red Sox, and yes, they have their share of free agents with Carl Crawford and Adrian Gonzalez, but their homegrown guys are spread around the diamond pretty evenly. You got Dustin Pedroia, you got Kevin Youkilis, you got John Lester, you have Clay Buchholz, and of course you have Jacoby Ellsbury, and now Josh Reddick is pushing for starting playing time in the time that he's been up in the major leagues. So really where I think Epstein has the advantage is he has a good way of buying out his young players like Pedroia and Youkilis and signing them to reasonable contracts in their early professional years where they're just coming into their own. He's kind of buying out their arbitration and free agency years in return for some security for these players. And it's really allowed him to form the nucleus of a young team. Now people say, well, the Red Sox have the oldest roster in baseball on paper, 30 years old. That might be true. But in the key spots at second base, center field, pitching, they're very solid and they're very young. Whereas the Yankees have kind of had to sign free agents to plug holes. The Red Sox have had the homegrown talent. And I think that Epstein, who when he came to the Red Sox said that he was going to be part of a $100 million player development machine on a year-in, year-out basis. That's a mandate that came down all the way from ownership with John Henry. I think he's really lived up to that during his time in Boston, and I think that's why the Red Sox have consistently competitive teams every year and manage to stay young at most positions. The biggest part of it all, of course, is the pitching. And he's got Lester and Buchholz locked up, for a few more years. This will bypass their prime years as free agents. They will eventually become free agents at some point, but right now in their early to mid-20s, where they're in the prime of their careers, they are locked up by the Red Sox. And that's one thing Cashman can't really say about the pitchers that he's got on his staff. He doesn't really have anybody besides Phil Hughes who's young and is locked up down the road into the future. So that's what I think. I think that player development and contracts are what make Epstein the better GM. Now, you may have a different opinion, but let me know. What do you think is the big difference between these guys, and which one do you think is the better GM? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and tell all your friends about This Week in Red.